Welcome to In the Arena of Success. This podcast is where courage meets opportunity. I'm your host, Henry Beeman, and every week we step into the arena with visionaries, innovators, and trailblazers from all walks of life. We dive deep into the heart of success and uncover the strategies, the struggles, and the unwavering spirit of those who overcome. The real question is, are you willing to step into the arena and fight for your success? Because in this arena, success is not a destination, it's a journey, and it starts right now. Today I'm joined by Lieutenant General Jeffrey Buchanan, who has led soldiers from the platoon all the way up to his culminating position of Commanding General of U.S. Army North, with more than 50,000 people under his command. With more than 3 decades of service under his belt, his story provides profound insights into leadership and what it takes to achieve success. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for joining me and for being willing to take part in this and to share a little bit of your story. Saw that now in retirement, you're running a leadership consulting firm. Sure. And doing a lot of
I'm doing a lot of different things, but I do some executive mentorship, some consulting. Most of my time is actually spent on volunteer efforts.
Yes, sir.
So, I'm on a series of boards for nonprofits. I'm a commissioner for our game and fish department here. I'm on the state parks board. So a number of different things. I'm a volunteer deputy sheriff. I get to patrol the mountains on horseback. So anyway, everything, I'm staying busy.
The way I have been starting all of these interviews is with 6 kind of lightning round questions, if you will, just some quick get to know you questions. And the first of those questions is, what is your hometown and what is it known for?
Well, I'll tell you where I live now, which is about 40 miles west of my original hometown. So originally I'm from Sierra Vista, Arizona, which is outside Fort Huachuca, and that's probably what it's known for, is kind of being a army town, if you will. But now I live on a small ranch outside of Patagonia, Arizona, on the other side of the mountain. So like I said, about 40 miles to the west. Patagonia is an interesting mix of cowboys and hippies. That's probably the best way I can describe it. 800 people, no stoplights, in fact, by town ordinance, no franchises.
Wow.
It's a unique little place, no gas station, anyway.
So that's a far cry from the Beltway.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sir. Well, the next question is, do you prefer cats or dogs?
I have both. Depends on, what you're using them for. So if you're trying to kill rodents, there's nothing like a cat. We have a couple of cats that are really expert at that. But for companionship, I like dogs.
I would have to agree with that. A good barn cat is hard to do without, but the dog is man's best friend. You may hear him in the background here. I have a young Aussie Doodle that's about 6 months old that we just got, and
we have a cow dog. It's an intentional mix of breeds. It's called a hanging tree dog.
Okay.
3/4 border collie, and then 1/4 that is a mix between Australian Shepherd, Catahoula, and Kelpie. Anyway, they want the border collie for their intelligence, but a lot of them are too sensitive, and this dog will fight coyotes and everything. So it works.
My first pup was a border collie, and I can definitely resonate with the sensitive. Well, what kind of music do you prefer to listen to?
Pretty eclectic. I guess I've been listening to more than anything, kind of a mix of old folk and country, Guy Clark, John Prine, those kinds of guys. Good songwriters with thoughtful lyrics. But, I listen to rock and roll or classical or jazz or blues. That's another thing that's kind of neat is we have this little teeny radio station, and it has the most eclectic music that you can imagine. You'll go from Frank Sinatra to Guns N' Roses to Chet Atkins. I mean,
That's
it's
incredible.
everything is kind of in there. It's pretty interesting.
That's the beauty of the small town radio. I get to
Right.
play what I want to play.
That's right.
That's pretty neat. Well, what's on your bookshelf? What are you currently reading right now?
Well, actually, the book I am reading right now is called American Ulysses, and it's a great biography on Ulysses Grant. So
Yes.
fascinating, great book. Goes from his time growing up through his time at West Point and Mexican War, and into he took a break from service and did some stuff as a civilian, and then through the Civil War. And I got to the point where he just got elected to president. So
Okay.
anyway, again, fascinating stuff. There's a there's a picture at the front of the book of this medallion that they minted back in the late 1800s. And the big idea was kind of our three greatest presidents had Washington, Lincoln, and Grant.
Right.
And Grant has, in the 20th century, for all kinds of reasons, but it's really sort of fallen out of favor. But when I look at servant leadership and nonpartisan leadership, especially during a time of war and everything, this guy set some pretty high bars to try to top. It's pretty interesting.
Civil War history is one of my favorite things to read.
Oh, okay.
And I have another one from him, which is, I think it's called Cigars, Whiskey, and Leadership, or something along those lines, from him. And it was a really neat story. And another one on the Civil War is called Empty Sleeves. It's about amputees in the Confederacy post-war, and what it was like for them to return to life. It was pretty interesting book.
Pretty fascinating. So the last book I read, I have on the shelf over here. I try to alternate, not exactly, probably 2/3 or 3/4 of my reading is nonfiction, but I try to go back to fiction as well. And the book I read was The Thin Red Line, written in 1962. Fascinating. The Army on Guadalcanal, and just horrific stuff. But it's a work of fiction. The author, James Jones, also wrote From Here to Eternity and a number of other books, but he had served in the 27th Infantry during World War II, and is very familiar with jungle fighting and everything. The reason I like fiction is because you get insights to people and character that it's hard to get with a nonfiction work. And if you have a good author, because a good author can tell you what's really going on inside. So,
and that's very true, and it's something I don't do enough of, is read fiction.
A good start for you, if you haven't ever done it, is historical fiction. So, like The Killer Angels about the Civil War, which is again, great book, insights to the Civil War, and it takes a lot of historical facts, but then the fiction part is conversations and what was going on inside this guy's mind, which we don't know. We can think we have a pretty good idea, but historical fiction authors fill in the gaps. So Michael Schirra was the guy that wrote Killer Angels. If you haven't ever read it,
no, I will have to put that on my to read list. It's going to the top of the stack.
It's all about the Battle of Gettysburg.
Okay,
so that's a great one, and then there's a series of other ones too. So.
Well, changing gears just a little bit, who's your biggest inspiration in life?
Well, I'll go with a statement that is kind of different, because this guy's been, long gone from us. But for me, and I am not as faithful or faith-filled as I should be, but when I look at great leaders, to me, I really appreciate leadership by example. What you do is far more powerful than what you say. And to me, the person who is the best leader by example in the world is Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
So when I look at his leadership and how he walked the walk, if you will. Um, that to me is a great example to strive to work towards. That doesn't mean I'm ever going to live up to it or be like that or anything else. But to me, it's inspirational.
Absolutely. Well, I can say as someone that's served under you several echelons below that the servant leadership is felt all the way down. And I was just looking at your website, and one of the things that sparked really quickly in my mind is it says Jeff Buchanan is a guy whose video matches his audio. And that resonated very clearly with what you're saying there.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Uh, so that's been my experience, and I think you're spot on. I couldn't think of a better example of a leader, and there's so much to learn in leadership by looking at Christ's story and looking through the way he led people in the Gospels. Because if you look at his ministry, there were only a couple of hundred people that he touched, but within a few years after he died, there were thousands of people impacted, and it's a great thing to aspire to as a leader is to look at that model, whether you're uh, from a faith tradition or not. It's an incredible leadership model.
Yeah.
So the last of our lightning round questions here is, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
Oh, I got lots of them, but this is one that sticks with me once in a while. Never pass up the opportunity to shut the heck up.
Oh.
And, actually, what that became more and more important the higher I rose in rank, because people are waiting for you to tell them things, or they're waiting for you to speak. But speaking is not nearly as important as listening.
Hmm.
And so what I've learned is to try to become a better listener. And by, especially, why are you listening? Are you listening to respond, or are you listening to try to understand?
Right.
And so if I'm triggering myself to respond, again, this goes back to that piece of advice. I'm not thinking about being quiet and actually focusing on the person who's speaking and trying to understand what's happening.
And you can see it on people's faces almost, those folks that are just waiting for a long enough pause that they can jump
That's
something
right.
else in there, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
exactly to your point, I even noticed it as a company commander. As soon as I would say something, everybody else would shut up and start saying, "All right, sir, how do we go do whatever you just said?" And it could have been the dumbest idea in the world. And people were trying to figure out how to go do it. And I'm like, no, 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 I need you to tell me that my idea is dumb. And trying to really surround yourself with folks who are not afraid to tell you that, hey, sir, your idea is dumb. We need to go in a different direction.
But see, you hit on a key quality that sometimes people miss, especially, I get asked a lot. I do a lot of, mentorship many times with civilian audiences, and they will ask me, well, what do you think is the most important leadership quality? And I tell them I think it's humility. Humility to me is extremely important, but sometimes we get it wrong. We confuse modesty with humility. I think Maya Angelou actually said it best. She said, you don't want modesty, you want humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Right.
And so you start out with a driver to think of other people. When you walk into the room, you don't start with an assumption that you're the smartest person around, but you actually have an opportunity to learn from other people who are smarter than you. Again, that's what humility is about. And I've seen some great leaders that were very humble. That doesn't mean, again, they're not bashful, they're not modest necessarily, but they're humble because they want to believe, they want to fight to learn from other people, and their belief is that other people have something to teach them.
Absolutely. That's powerful. And I've heard that quote from Maya Angelou before, and that one has to sit with you for a few minutes to think about it and really dig into that. And so where did all of this start for you? If you rewind back to the the beginning of your story and growing up as a young man. When was it that you decided to follow after the military?
My dad was an Army officer. He's a helicopter pilot, a couple of tours in Vietnam, and a career soldier. And I was born in Germany, kind of grew up all over the place. One of the times that my dad was in Vietnam, we lived on a reservation not too far, just west of here in Arizona. So I call Arizona home because I've lived here more than anywhere else, from kindergarten, first grade, off and on, up through all of my high school years were here, and college. My mom, after my dad died, my mom still here. And so this has been home. For me, though, I had the example of my father and what service was all about, what the military was all about. So I was not a stranger to it. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my whole life. Anyway, I went to college, joined ROTC, got a 3-year ROTC scholarship after I was in college. I had decent grades in high school, but not good enough to get a scholarship out of high school.
Right.
And I've been a Boy Scout and explorer. And I've done a lot of high adventure stuff, lots of long, 50-plus-mile backpacking trips, climbing, caving, all kinds of things. And I had a lot of adventures. So when I got into ROTC, the things that they were doing, orienteering or land navigation, yeah, I've done this many times. I know what I'm doing here. Or, rappelling off a cliff, I've done this many times. I grew up climbing and caving, so a lot of it resonated. And that, coupled with my experience in scouts, had kind of taught me how to be a leader. So I excelled in ROTC. But going into the military, I had always thought, well, I'll stay, as long as I'm having fun and making a difference. And I accepted that I'm going to work for a jerk now and again. But the good thing about being in the military is that those people change, you change jobs, there's
Right.
a lot moving around. I don't know exactly at what point, but at some point in time, I decided, well, I think I'll stay at least till 20. And it just kept going. And I ended up, retiring with 37 years. So,
Right.
And I had a blast. I mean, there's some very bad days, don't get me wrong. But all in all, I loved my time in the Army. I loved the people, loved the mission, the sense of, the noble purpose is the best way to describe it. So I love that. I miss some of it. I don't miss all of it, but I certainly miss the team, the sense of mission, and the people, and how we get together behind a tough task.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of things that you hit on that I wanted to ask a little bit more about. First off is you mentioned, you kind of accept that at some point you're going to work for a jerk. And I think that applies both in and out of the military.
Sure.
But in one of those experiences, what's something that you learned? Because I think we learn from both good and bad leaders, but what's something that you learned from working for a bad leader?
Well, there's a lot of different flavors of, bad leaders, people who are completely risk intolerant and won't allow you to be innovative or do your job because they don't want to incur any risk to them or whatever. But that kind of leads to another one, which is so career focused that they're worried about what their report says and these kinds of things instead of learning and trying to get the job done in the best way possible. I work for some people that I didn't ever care to work for again, but I don't think I ever worked for what I would call a truly toxic leader. But I've seen a couple of them. I've served alongside them. I was a deputy division commander in Iraq, and one of our sister divisions was commanded by somebody who's absolutely toxic. And I don't know that in the current literature where there's an agreed upon definition, but a toxic leader is poisonous to the organization. And some of the common traits are they promote themselves at the expense of others. They're demeaning, abusive, but they make themselves look great at the expense of other people. all of these kinds of things. There's an interesting insight here. So anyway, you see some of that, and the insight is this: when you're dealing with the toxic leader, it's actually pretty easy to fool the boss, but it's virtually impossible to fool your subordinates and very, very hard to fool your peers. But your boss can get fooled. Now, I was mindful of that. I've had on at least 2 occasions that I know of, I had a toxic leader working for me, and I couldn't see it. I was blind to it because this person was producing. They were doing incredible things, but I just didn't understand how they were producing. And in one case, this was another Iraq tour, a different one, in fact. And I walked into my area at about 2:00 one morning and found that, I would say soldier, but actually it was a naval officer sitting in the corner crying. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And that's when I started digging into it. I found out that this person's boss, who was one of my star pupils, if you will, was absolutely toxic. And everybody knew it, except for me.
Right.
I think when you run across somebody like that, if you see a lieutenant acting that way or a sergeant, maybe you can change their behavior. But this guy was a colonel. And, I knew that I wasn't going to change him. And the beauty of being deployed is it was easy to put him on the next plane smoking home.
Right.
But they are truly terrible for an organization. And sometimes people don't see it because they see that they're producing. They're tearing apart the organization and driving people out of the military.
Right. And I know you dealt with that as a commander in the military, but I'm sure you also, as you're engaging with corporations today, engage with similar situations. How do you advise and mentor civilian organizations?
I try to do the same thing that worked in the military for me, which is to leverage this organization's core values. And I guarantee there's no organization out there that says we're going to treat people like crap, or we're going to treat people without respect. You know what I mean? Their values say the right thing. And so I say, well, look, this is what this says. This is the identity of your organization, but your behavior right now is in conflict with this. So let me lay this out for you. Why? Anyway, so I try to use their own stuff against them, if you know.
That's a tough conversation to have, but I think at some point, folks open their eyes and either are going to change their behavior or the organization determines this isn't the right organization for them anymore.
Yeah, and sometimes again, I think it's easier to truly change, when somebody's relatively young.
Right.
When we are, 20, 30, 40 years into it,
right. Yes, sir.
Our behavior has gotten us this far, it's hard to come off of that.
Yes, sir. On a similar thread, as you're talking about some of these experiences, is there a time that you hit a roadblock or a challenge, a feeling of being stuck, one of those things that's you almost had to throw your hands up and say, wait a minute, let me figure this out?
Sure. Yeah, I've done it a number of times. I've made mistakes and learned from them. And the beauty is I worked for people that were tolerant of my mistakes and looked at them as learning opportunities. There's an old saying, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment.
Yes.
So I've had my share of bad judgment over time. That's not exactly what you mean, I don't think, by getting stuck, but I've faced some tough dilemmas. One or a couple of them on legal issues. I was a general court martial convening authority for many, many years. So once in a while, I would get in some tough dilemmas on the leadership side. But I'll share a story with you. One of the important things that I think about, and you can look this up in Army doctrine, that one of the responsibilities of leadership is to create shared understanding. And so that means that, the people at the lowest end of an organization understand intent and probably understand what they're doing And at the highest end of the organization, you see the reality of what's happening based on what the guys at the bottom are seeing. So that's kind of the ideal. But sometimes that goes astray. And so I'll give you one example. This is from my second tour in Iraq, 2005 and 6. I was with an organization where we were essentially the combat advisors for the Iraqi Special Police Commandos. Now, the only thing police about these guys was their name. It was an urban light infantry raid force. And we're dominantly focused on Al Qaeda targets.
Right.
But we spent a lot of time going to get these guys in the middle of the night. You know, whether we were in Fallujah, Ramadi, Samarra, Mosul, Tal Afar, the western side, Abu Ghraib, western side of Baghdad, etc.
Right.
And we operated in small teams. Started out as 8-man teams and grew eventually to 11. 3 Humvees. We would go with these guys out, and you know, we didn't own battle space, so we were all over the place and literally operated throughout the country. But the biggest killer at the time, this is again 2005 and 6, the biggest killer of U.S. forces at the time was suicide vehicle-borne IEDs or car bombs, right? And they would drive, it was dominantly Al Qaeda that would do this, and it was in these Sunni neighborhoods. They would drive those trucks laden with bombs into one of our convoys, blow up, and kill a bunch of people. And so some well-meaning staff officer at our higher headquarters developed this order, and you know, the command issued it that we had to keep a 50-meter bubble around all of our convoys. So you couldn't let a civilian vehicle within 50 meters.
Right.
And that idea was to keep these suicide car bombs out of our formations, which all makes good sense. But see, that wasn't the only killer. What I just described was the favored technique by the Sunni guys. The Shia-backed guys, the Iranian-backed militia groups, used what they called EFPs, or an explosively formed projectile. This is essentially a tube with a copper shape charge, and they would set it up, and this piece of molten copper would go so fast, it would blow right through an M1 tank, let alone a Humvee.
Right.
You know? And the way that they triggered these things was by using a passive infrared device. So they would set it up and aim it, and it was essentially lying dormant. But when there was a U.S. patrol approaching, they would call the cell phone number, it would activate it, and it would be triggered to go on the next heat signature that came into that detector's area. It would go automatically. And there's a little bit of game of cat and mouse and how do we get around it and everything. But one of the things that we did is when we were operating in these areas where those guys were, we changed our tactics. We mixed with traffic. Because if we were in and out of civilian cars, they could never get a separation with us to be able to trigger their devices. So anyway, we changed our tactics depending on where we are. So now I got this order from the headquarters in Baghdad that says, you have to do this. So I got essentially 3 choices. Well, I can blindly follow the order and get a bunch of my guys killed unnecessarily.
Right.
That's choice number 1. Choice number 2 is I can disobey the order and keep doing what we're doing, but now I've taught all my guys that it's okay to disobey orders. Or I can do choice number 3, which is what I chose, which is tell my guys we're not going to change, then go back to the headquarters and tell them I'm not going to follow this. And when I'm in this area, and here's why. Here's the tactics these bad guys are using. Now, it wasn't the fault of the guys up in the headquarters, but they didn't have an understanding of what was going on in the street at the time. So it was my job as a subordinate to create shared understanding.
To be the sensor and give them the common operating picture.
That's right.
And I think that's really, really important as young folks are trying to be successful in today's world, is to know that their role, whether they're at the bottom of an organization, they still have an influence on what the entirety of that organization does and have an important role to play, especially in the military.
And
but
their
in any
perceptions of what's happening, sometimes they'll own the golden nugget. You know?
Right. That's it. A lot of times you're smartest folks. And it's also important to know I see a lot of it in my generation and the generations younger than me is almost this mentality of success comes in pretty packages all the time. I think it's the social media influence, and you see the good side of every story, and folks cherry pick what they share and don't share, and those hard decisions and those tough places of, well, I've got to make a choice to blindly follow something which could get people killed. I could disregard it or try and influence the chain. Those are conversations or things that are often left off the table, and it's actually fought with a lot of tough challenges and hard
There's a lot.
decisions.
The black and white decisions are really easy to make.
Right.
Most of them are black and white.
There's a lot of operating in the gray. Has there ever been a point where you feel like, wow, I made it? I've come from a young man from Arizona, and now I'm a 3-star general.
It wasn't as a 3-star, it was a battalion commander. I mean, that was the top of my ambition, was to try to be a battalion commander. And I thought that was probably, and I don't disagree with it now as I think about back on it, but it's probably the most, or one of the most important positions in the Army, at least. But there's a lot of reasons that I wanted to serve at that level. I thought I had something to offer. I thought I could really make a difference. But it's the last level that you can know everybody's name. They can know you by what you look like from the back under night vision goggles walking in the middle of the night.
Right.
That's the commander. They know that because you've been together. But it's the last level where it's really personal. Above that, it's far more impersonal. I tried not to forget about those battalion commanders the higher I went, but the place that I wanted to be, the top of my ambition was really to be a battalion commander. And when I got to do that, it was all downhill after that.
Right.
I don't mean that in a bad way, but as far as my ambition, I was like, okay, yeah, I'll keep serving. I think I can make a difference, but I certainly never thought I was going to be a general officer. It just got selected, and okay, I'll keep
Yes, sir. And from that kind of perspective, you talk about a battalion command kind of being that last place and remembering those battalion commanders as you climbed up the chain. What's some way that senior leaders in an organization, whether in or out of the military, can maintain that focus on their mid-level managers?
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, when we talk about leadership, you can centralize and control or decentralize and empower. And if you trust your mid-level leaders, my recommendation would be to decentralize and empower. Decentralize, allow them to actually make meaningful decisions, and then empower them to act. And empower them to act when they see an opportunity to seize it and move out. And accept the fact that at some point in time, you're going to find out about it. And it's probably going to be later than this person who's already moving.
Right.
But if you appreciate that level of leadership, if you appreciate those and you trust them, then I would delegate real authority to them and empower them to act. And the organization will perform far better than if you try to centralize it and control all decisions at the highest possible level. You see, the other thing is that controlling spirit at the highest level is demeaning and deflating to everybody down below because they're just waiting to be told what to do.
Absolutely.
I think we saw this when Russia attacked Ukraine.
Absolutely.
That was their style of leadership, centralized and controlled. And it's amazing to me how bad the Russians actually are.
Yes.
But a lot of that is because they don't have that capability down through. They don't have an NCO corps for real. They don't have that capability in lower level leaders, and they don't decentralize or delegate and empower them.
Absolutely. And the decentralized authority enables and teaches your junior leaders how to think, not just what to think, at a much earlier level.
That's right. And how to think as far as that's education instead of training.
Absolutely.
And education is far more important, to get through the gray areas and the tough decisions.
In that thread, there's a story I've heard or read. I'm trying to place where I saw it, but it was a young captain at a small combat outpost that General Dempsey was visiting, handed General Dempsey a copy of the book, The Starfish and the Spider, and Mission Command was born.
I don't know.
But it's about the decentralization of authority and that same sort of concept.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting story. I don't know the veracity of it or not. Maybe one day I'll get to ask him. But it's a neat concept.
He works at Duke.
Yes.
Yeah, he's an associate professor of some sort at Duke. My son went to grad school there. It's probably 3-4 years ago now, on a hunting scholarship.
Okay.
He was coming out of the Ranger Regiment and went right back to the Ranger Regiment afterwards. But he went to Duke and had some opportunities with General Dempsey. I've known him for a lot of years. What a wonderful, wonderful, selfless servant. Great
He's
guy.
an incredible leader.
And we certainly miss him.
Absolutely.
But we all get old and retire someday.
That's it. Yes, sir. So as we're wrapping up a little bit here, what are you doing now?
So I do have a company. It's called Lead by Example Consulting. It's focused on leadership development. I do some things with corporate audiences, some still with government. Actually, I do a little bit with the military, but more focused on FEMA and emergency management and those kinds of things. And then on the corporate side, all walks of all different sorts of things. I also am engaged doing some academic things, guest lecturer on leadership or something.
Right. Yes, sir.
So that's kind of what I'm doing for pay, which is not a lot. I'm trying to be retired. When I retired from the military, I went to go work as a deckhand on a charter boat in Homer, Alaska, and to try to sort myself out. What was my priorities? What was I going to do next? And I decided two things. I did not want to be deployed anymore, and I did not want a full-time job. And so what I learned through deciding that, though, was how to say no. I had grown up in a culture that was always yes. Hey, can you do this? Yes. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
And now that I'm kind of on my own, and I missed all three of my kids' senior years in high school, and so I would like to be there a little bit more consistently for my grandkids. I have 7 of them now. And part of that was I was not going to have a full-time job. Now I'm pretty busy, not with the paying stuff. I'll do something a week, a month, maybe. But I am a commissioner for the Game and Fish Department. I'm on the State Parks Board. I'm on the boards of a couple of nonprofits. One's focused on building resilience. One's focused on NCO leadership development, especially at the junior NCO levels. So I do that. I also do work as you heard, as a deputy sheriff, the ranch liaison for our sheriff. So lots of stuff.
That definitely keeps your plate full, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So as we part here, what's your parting advice for the listeners, the folks that tune in to listen to this? What would be your best piece of advice to give them? Strive
to be a lifelong learner. Learn from others, learn for yourself, learn by doing, take some notes, record it. I also wrote a book, by the way, which is not yet published. It's set to go. I'm kind of working through to get it published. There's a whole chapter on being a lifelong learner. And we were just talking reading. This is a great example as well. But your podcast is ultimately helping to feed the same thing. I hope you're continuing to learn along the way as well.
Yes, sir. Thanks so much for being willing to spend some time with me.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for what you're still doing.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. Did you like what you heard on today's podcast? If so, do me a quick favor and hit the like and subscribe button. That way you'll stay updated on all the new content that I publish. Also, visit me on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and tell me what you want to hear more about. I love to hear your comments. That way I can continue to produce content that you love and enjoy. You can also check out my website, henrybeeman.com.